effective researcher. And in fact, I would say that it's really one of 8 things that are needed, not just to get published, but to get published in a way that actually has an impact, to write something that other people actually want to read. And so we'll go to the list. If you look at this list, okay, this is easy. You know, everybody can do. There are 8 things, right? Okay, you gotta have a good idea. You're gonna have to have adequate knowledge of your topic, so you don't do and say stupid things about whatever your content is. You've got to design an optimal study. You got to measure things well. You've got to execute the study competently. You have to make sure your data get into the analyses cleanly. And then you have to be statistically sophisticated enough to be able to do good analyses. You're going to have to end up with important and interesting results, and then you're going to have to write it up well. Again, so that reviewers think that this is worthwhile and well written, and so that readers find it sufficiently persuasive. Now, I think in graduate education, we really do a pretty good job with these first 6 things. If you take classes in methods and statistics and measurement, your advisors and mentors give you a lot of advice, and older graduate students, and not all of these other things. Well, number 7 is a little bit of a crapshoot, because we all know that you can really do well on the first of the 6 things, have really good ideas, and run great studies, and still have so-so results. So there's not much we can do about that. Where we don't do very well, I think, in training graduate students is talking about how to write a well-written manuscript. Because the way it usually happens, I suspect this is true of most of you, is that you give your manuscripts and your writing to your advisor, and they mark it up and they say, well, I don't understand this paragraph, we need to have a different word here, change this sentence. But without giving any direct instruction to think about how to write. And we're supposed to get it by osmosis over a period of a few years, just begin to pick up somehow about how to write better. That's beneficial. I'm sure you're better now than you were when you started grad school, but it's not very efficient. And I would like to see us move to trying to teach people how to write more explicitly. How to teach more explicitly how to write better. So that's what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to make you brilliant writers in 40 minutes. I just want to give you a few tidbits, and I'm going to approach this at 2 levels. One is I want to give you some schemas, how to think broadly about writing both more clearly and more engagingly. And then I'm going to give you a few take-home things that you can use today that will begin to improve your writing in minor ways. Some of these are not going to be very profound, but they will gradually move your writing to make it better and better and better. Perhaps most importantly, some of these specific suggestions, it's not just the specific suggestion that's going to help. It's that when you see the specific suggestions, you begin to notice things in your writing that you hadn't seen before, and you're going to be able to start self-correcting in other areas. For those of you who want it, I'll get the email list for everybody if you want this. So you take notes as you go, but I'm going to go pretty quickly because I have a lot that I want to cover, and then I'll email this to everybody so you can have all of my hints and tidbits. The first thing you have to realize is that there are almost no good writers. In fact, what I really think, the way I wrote this originally, it was that there are no good writers. None. You're no good. I'm not any good. And I mean that. Well, wait a minute. I've read articles where they're really well written. Yes, they are. But it's not because the author was a good writer. It was because the author was a good rewriter. Now, this is important to realize because you can read these wonderful articles. The first drafts of these people were mostly crap. Just like yours, just like mine. Now, maybe some of you guys, I don't know, John, Steve, Sabine, somebody, maybe your first draft, you get to the last word, you say, I'm done. I'm going to submit it today. No. You spend as much time revising and rewriting as you do writing. The reason that's important for you is because most of us sit down in front of that screen, and that little cursor's blinking, and we start to write. And we write a sentence, and it's really bad. Oh, I'll write another one. Ooh, it sort of makes the point, but that's not very good. And you write a few, and then you kill it all, and you start over again. And you do that for about 10 minutes, and the sense of panic begins to rise. Ooh, this is not going well. I'm getting head nods at this point. That's fine. Do not worry about that at all. Now, obviously, the better your first draft is, the easier it is sometimes to rewrite. But it's okay if your first draft is complete garbage. Get the ideas down, get them down quickly. You've got plenty of time to rewrite. Most differences between weak, unclear, ineffective writing and strong, clear, persuasive writing occurs during the rewriting stage, not during the writing stage. You can always fix it.
Don't let it paralyze you. Don't begin to panic and get up and go watch the Weather Channel instead of writing because you don't like it. Just keep writing, getting the ideas down. And this is the way it happens for almost everybody. But in the rewriting process, you have to think consciously and deliberately about what you're doing. Most of us, we read a sentence, we read a paragraph, and say, that's not very good. And all we can do is just try variations, kind of mindlessly and intuitively about how to restructure this. What I hope to do is give you some schemas for how to deal with paragraphs and sentences that you know are not very good. Let me also mention that I'm going to show you that in many cases, small changes can fix big problems. You can have a paragraph that really sounds pretty awful and you know it. Your advisor says this is really bad. You say, oh my God, I got to start over. No, you don't usually. You can often tweak in small ways that make it acceptable, if not good. And I'm going to demonstrate that to you before we get done today. All right, what do we need to have a well-written paper? It has to be organized. At the level of the paper, APA style takes care of that for us to some extent. But it has to be organized within sections. The paragraphs have to flow. Sentences within paragraphs. You've got to have a structure and an organization. Your writing needs to be clear and precise and readable. Those aren't all the same thing, but they're related to each other. We're going to talk about that. It needs to be, well, not necessarily engaging and interesting. It just can't be dreadfully dull. It's better if it's engaging. And I'm going to try to help show you how to write in a somewhat more engaging way. Grammatical correctness is really important, and my students ignore this. Everybody has little grammatical glitches. And you feel like, well, that's not very important. And punctuation, well, I don't know where commas go, but who cares? The problem is, when reviewers look at a paper, I think there's a halo effect that occurs when the writer is not using grammar and punctuation perfectly. And I can't trust you to be a good thinker and a good researcher if you don't have a basic command of English grammar and punctuation. So pay more attention to that. And same thing with the professional appearance of it. Master APA style. You have to. Because when you start violating APA style with respect to headings and spacing and reference style, reviewers look at it as you're not sufficiently professionally sophisticated. You haven't quite learned the norms of your own profession, and sort of just taints their view of it. I'm sure everybody's familiar with the privacy effect, right? So you've got to make a good first impression. Don't have a whole lot of time today. I'm just going to focus on a few tips for these two. Now, what do we do normally to try, after we have the beginnings of a rough draft, what do we normally do to make our writing clearer, more precise, more readable, and more engaging? The answer is we proofread and rewrite. There's a problem with that. Now, I'm not discouraging you from proofreading. You need to do it, and you need to do it dozens of times. But it will only take you so far. And the reason is, you write sentences to communicate certain propositions you want to make. Your ideas, your facts, theories, speculations, criticisms, or findings. And then you read the paper to see if you communicated them properly. And when you proofread it, you easily get each proposition because that you already know what the point was. Oh, that sentence is clear. Yeah, maybe. But when readers read your sentences, they may not interpret your propositions the way you intend. They may not understand them at all, or they might misinterpret you. See the problem? Your proofreading will not tell you when you were unclear in many cases because you know what you were trying to say. Well, how can you fix that? Answer is you can't. At least not by yourself. You're going to have other people proofread your papers. Now, you've heard that before, and you might give your papers to your friends or your grad students. But just giving somebody a paper and saying, read this and give me some feedback on it, it'll help a little bit, but you won't get the kind of feedback you really need. They'll say, well, this one paragraph wasn't clear. Oh, did you think about pulling in this research over Jones and Smith that I think is relevant? Or I didn't quite understand that. When you ask someone to proofread a paper, insist when you give it to them. I want you to make a mark on the page every time you find a word, a phrase, a sentence, or a paragraph that was either not perfectly clear or where things didn't flow. Mark everything. Be brutal. You just don't want a half a dozen pieces of feedback from other people. You want dozens and dozens of pieces of feedback. And then take it in the spirit in which they gave it to you. That doesn't mean you have to do everything the proofreader said. This didn't make any sense to me, they say. When you look at it again and again, and say, well, yeah, it did make sense. Well, don't change it. You See what I mean, though? It's got to be detailed. If you're trying to be engaging and clear in your writing and precise, you've got to get this kind of feedback. All right. So let me give you some tips for improving the clarity and readability of your papers. Look at each sentence and make sure you're using the most precise descriptive word or phrase possible. This does two things. It makes sure that you're precise and clear so you're not misunderstood. But also, when you increase the precision of your sentences, they sound better and they seem more professional because you're more precise. Here's an example. Let's say you're starting a paper and it's going to be about depression. You started out, many people experience depression. Research has shown blah, blah, blah. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. You understand what the sentence means. Is it as precise and descriptive as it could be? Well, not really. What people? How many is many? Depression by what criteria? Wouldn't it be a more precise and clear and interesting and impressive sentence to increase the precision of that sentence by saying something like, according to the Centers for Disease Control, nearly 10% of adult Americans report feeling depressed in the past 2 weeks. Research has shown blah, blah, blah. See my point? You increase the precision and it sounds more professional. The first sentence, Grandma and Grandpa could have written. Last sentence sounds like somebody who knows what they're doing. Okay, I'm just giving you lots of little tips. Any one of these is not going to completely improve your writing. Just start to think about what you need to be paying attention to. Sometimes you'll realize you have a really clunky sentence. You don't know what to do with it. First thing I would do when I have a clunky sentence, and I say this is just long, it doesn't make any sense to anybody, check to see how far the verb is away from the subject of the sentence. The closer you can keep the verb to the subject, the clearer it's going to be to the reader, the easier it is to read. What about the sentence? The participants who were instructed to answer the open-ended questions completely before rating their reactions to 5 bipolar adjectives, then do the Stroop test. We all know what it means. You kind of feel there's a little bit of labor there in getting through that 17-word clause. How about something like, you could rewrite this many different ways. The participants were instructed to answer the open-ended questions completely before rating their reactions to 5 bipolar adjectives. They then completed the Stroop test. And all I did was make sure that the verb was closer to the subject. Avoid unnecessary complexity and clunkiness in your writing. I think English teachers in high school ruin us because they want us to write fancy. You don't want to write fancy. You want to write clear. Cognition is often, though not always, deliberate. That is amenable to conscious manipulation. Whereas affect is difficult to intentionally reduce or completely extinguish, although one may suppress its outward manifestations. It's a real sentence from a real manuscript. Well, one thing that's wrong with this is a couple things. The parenthetical phrases. Now, there's nothing wrong with parenthetical phrases, but there's 3 of them in this. And when you have parenthetical phrases, it causes the reader to suspend what they were reading while you get through the parenthetical thing. Often, parenthetical phrases, when I read them, what it seems to say to me is the author is saying, I know I didn't say this clearly enough a minute ago, so I'm going to try again inside parentheses. Nothing wrong with parenthetical phrases, but don't put 3 in a sentence. Another thing that struck me about this is cognition is often, though not always. If I say I'll often do something, do you think I do it always? No. So why do you need that? How about something as simple as this? Now, what is the sentence really saying? Let's cut it down to its basic core. Cognition is often under conscious, deliberate control, whereas affect is not. That's all that sentence says. Now, that last thing is completely irrelevant to what the author was talking about. Look at your long, complex, convoluted, clunky sentences and cut them down. You can always build them back up again if you need to have more detail. That's fine. But get them down to their essence. Another one. Some of these things I'm going to show you today are just my pet peeves. They're not important. They're not important at all. It's just that I think we all have to cringe when we see certain things. Results show that lower levels of self-esteem are predictive of higher levels of depression. Well, a couple of things. Why do we need the levels thing in there? Higher levels are predictive of higher levels. Why can't we just say, like, low self-esteem rather than lower levels of self-esteem? And we're predictive of. This is the pet peeve part. Why not? Results show that low self-esteem predicted greater depression. Is that better? Yeah, that's one of my pet peeves. We're predictive of it. We're indicative of it. Or reflective. problem is, how do you catch these kinds of problems, the clunkiness problem? The only way I know to catch clunkiness, and this is the way I do it, and I've heard other people say this, to catch problems with complexity and clunkiness and cadence and flow, read the paper aloud. But don't read it aloud. And when you first start doing this, you feel like a complete idiot. You've got to go somewhere where there's nobody else, right? Make sure nobody comes home while I'm reading my paper out loud. But don't read it like you're proofreading. If you just read it out loud the way you read it to yourself in your head, you're not going to catch the complexity and clunkiness. Read it as if you were sort of like a news broadcaster, and it's the script of a documentary for the Science Channel, the Discovery Channel, or a documentary we're going to show at SPSP. What would the voiceover sound like? And could you imagine a documentary opening with this sentence we just saw, where the narrator says, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Cognition is often, though not always, deliberate. That is amenable to conscious manipulation." Whereas affect, you would never hear the voiceover in a documentary say that. You would realize this is stiff and overblown. And I think if I could pick out the one thing over the years that I think has helped my own writing, it's reading out loud as if it's a script. Because I'll get a paper done and I'll think this sounds really pretty damn good. I've proofread this thing a dozen times. It's ready to go. And I do this exercise and I'll find 5, 10, 15 places where I go, oh my God, that's terrible. Because when readers read it, you want it to flow. You want the cadence to be right. You don't want it to be clunky. All right, so let's say you find bad sentences, bad paragraphs. You're going to find them. People are going to point them out to you. You're going to find them, and you don't know what to do about them. And like I said, you don't want to just start putting them in different versions until something seems to work. Let me tell you how I fix really clunky bad sentences. Strip the sentence down to its base clause, and then build it back on again. Every sentence has a base clause. Usually what it is, the simplest base clause is the subject, the verb, and often an object. So I could have a really long sentence that comes down to the participants completed their questionnaire. And I could have a lot of information in there about who the participants are, what was on the questionnaire, but that's the base clause. Strip it down to that point, and then build it up again, being very critical about what you're putting in to make the point you want to make. Let me give you an example. Various individuals differ in their personal tendencies to engage in assorted bad behaviors. Okay, that's clunky and bad. Everybody agree with that? All right, how do you fix it? Now, you can start just trying randomly different variations of it. Let's try this way of looking for the base clause. What's the base clause? Individuals differ. This is an aside. I hate the word individuals. Got nods here from other people. First of all, individual is actually an adjective. You can have individual dollars, individual chairs. Individuals, it's also vague. If you find a better, more accurate word, who are the individuals? Children, adults, clients, participants? There's somebody. And even if you can't get that specific, why not call them people? They're people. In real life, you don't use the word individuals to refer to people. You'd say, how many people were at the party? You'd say, how many individuals were at the party? You wouldn't say that. I don't know where we got into that. So I'm going to change individuals to people because I don't like any names. I never allow it. What kind of individuals? Various individuals is the original. Can we have individuals that aren't various? Can we have individuals who are all the same person? All right, so let's get rid of various, and let's just start out with people. All right, people do what? They differ. They differ how? In their tendencies. Now again, you're looking very critically at each thing you're adding. Didn't say in their tendencies, and in their personal tendencies. Do you have any tendencies that aren't personal? What would that mean? So let's get rid of that. They engage in, okay, so they differ in their tendency to engage in what? Assorted bad behaviors. That's vague as hell, right? Assorted, it sounds like you bought a box of crackers that had different kinds of assortment. Bad behaviors. Bad behaviors can be anything from spitting on the sidewalk to murder. What are we talking about? Let's make it clearer and more interesting by specifying what those bad behaviors are. So I tore it down, and now I'm building it up critically. And here's what I came up with. This is a real manuscript that I figured out. What was the name? a tendency to engage in various dishonest, manipulative, unethical, and antisocial behaviors. That's what the author was actually trying to say. Is that a better sentence than the first one? You can come up with your own variations that could be as good as, if not better than that, if you tear it down and build it up again. Right? Okay, that's the sentence level. What about the paragraph? You'll have your advisor or a proofreader say, this paragraph doesn't make sense to me. Or you read it, you say, it's herky-jerky as I'm trying to read it. When you have paragraphs that are crap, keep in mind that familiar information you've already discussed, should start the sentences, should be the topic of the sentence. New information about that old topic finishes sentences. So the topic of each new sentence should seem vaguely familiar to the reader because you've already talked about it. Not necessarily in the previous sentence, but somewhere recently. If you think about any given sentence, there's a topic, there's something or somebody you're talking about, and you're providing detailed information about that topic. So when you string together sentences, imagine this is 4 sentences. And in the first sentence, the topic is A, and I tell you B about A. 5 more information. Well, now that I've introduced B, I can use B. It's old information now. So I now tell you C about B, and I also want to tell you D about D. And now that I've talked about D, I can use D as a topic, and I can tell you E about D. Contrast that with these 5 sentences. I tell you B about A. The next sentence, suddenly I'm talking about C, which didn't appear anywhere else before. And I tell you D about C. And now I'm back telling you C about A. Telling you D about B is probably okay, because I already introduced D and a little bit of B and a little bit of D, but now E comes out of nowhere. You're talking about that. That would read as a clunky sentence, that even though each sentence was perfectly clear, the reader would have to make certain connections. You want to help make those connections. Let me give you an example. The topic of a sentence should link backwards to what people already know, and then move the ideas forward by giving new information. Anybody ever tell you this before? In a writing class or English or anywhere? Let me give you an example. Real example. Social psychologists assume that behavior varies with context. In the 1960s and 70s, questions were raised about our ability to predict behavior by personality tests. However, by the 1980s, aggregation was suggested as a solution to behavioral prediction. It was realized that while predicting single instances of behavior may be unreliable, patterns of behavior could be identified from a large number of observations. Collecting data about a behavior in different situations and at different times demonstrated that personality differences are somewhat stable over time. Okay, we get the basic idea. But let's look at the topics. Social psychologists, that's already. Questions is the topic of the next sentence. Have we said anything about any questions? No, that's something new. Aggregation comes out of nowhere, hasn't been defined, hasn't been mentioned. Patterns of behavior. What patterns of behavior? Nobody's talking about patterns of behavior yet. The topic of that sentence has not been foreshadowed, nor is the topic of the sentence. The last sentence about collecting data. Who said anything about collecting data? Let's take the same ideas and all of the same sentences and string them together the way I'm suggesting, where each topic has to be sort of foreshadowed so people know what you're talking about. All right, first sentence is fine. Social psychologists assume that behavior varies with context. All right, so my next sentence, the topic has to do something with that. Now again, it doesn't have to be the immediately prior sentence, but it has to be introduced. So, social psychologists assume that behavior varies with context. This assumption, oh, what assumption? The one I just talked about. This assumption led some theorists in the 1960s and 70s to question whether personality tests are useful in predicting behavior. Right? Now the topic of the next sentence better have been somewhere in those sentences. However, by the 1980s, research on this question, that's the topic, what question? The question about personality tests in the previous sentence, showed that, although predicting single instances of behavior is difficult, combining many behavioral observations over different situations, aggregation, new details, increases behavioral prediction. Now I can use aggregation. Research using aggregation demonstrated that personality difference was somewhat stable in situations of time. Same idea, same topic. Can you see that it flows? So when you have a bad, clunky paragraph, do this little exercise, and it will make it smooth. All right? So that's just, I know it's a hodgepodge of a lot of little tips for clarity and readability, but it gets you started thinking about what to look for, and you'll see other things. How about engaging in it? I had dinner with Dan Wigner a number of years ago, and he made an interesting comment. He said there are 2 kinds of psychologists. those who are afraid of being wrong, and those who are afraid of being boring. I think we know which one Dan was, given how interesting all of his work. Well, my view is we ought to be concerned about both, at least somewhat. We don't want to be completely concerned about being wrong, because if you're just completely petrified of being wrong, you're never going to say anything new. It's going to seem outlandish. But we have to also be afraid of being boring, because we want people to think that we have something interesting to say that they can use. And you know very well, you've read enough articles to know that in the hands of a good writer, even a relatively dull topic, the paper itself can be engaging. You also know that you could be reading a paper, you read the title, and this ought to be a fascinating paper, and the writer has taken the life out of it by the style of writing. So how can we be more engaging and interesting? Well, you got to start strong, first of all, from the very beginning. You need to set the stage and show your reader that they are in the presence of someone who takes writing seriously enough to be at least mildly interesting or not dreadfully boring. You need a kick-ass abstract. You've heard this before, but your abstract is the most important part of your paper. Most of us write it last, and we write it in a hurry because the paper's done and we want to submit it, right? Yeah, we have a lot of people nodding. Yeah, that's me. But again, going back to the primacy effect, if you have a dull abstract, you're setting your reader up to expect this whole thing's going to be dull. And in fact, when they go to PsycInfo and they find your abstract, unless they have to read your paper, if the abstract is boring, they're going to assume the paper is going to be boring and they're not going to look at it. Your abstract should be written with more care than anything else in your paper, and it needs to be interesting. I don't mean you're using fancy stories or big words. It just has to be where the reader goes, I would like to read this paper. You also want to start the beginning of your paper with strong opening sentences and paragraphs. Now, of course, you'd like to have strong sentences and paragraphs completely through the paper. That's not going to happen for any of us. But you want to start really strong. And this is my own personal bias. You want to achieve interest through interesting ideas that are expressed in a clear, engaging way, and not through gimmicks. Now, some cutesy titles, I mean, people differ on this. Yeah, if you really can't avoid, I mean, your topic is so great that you can use a cutesy title and, or some popular saying, that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes you see cutesy titles that are clearly gratuitous, and when I see that, I assume that the author is saying, my paper is not interesting enough to attract you unless I use sort of false advertising with a really cutesy title. Same thing with bizarre introductory scenarios. I reviewed a paper last year that started, imagine you woke up and found you had no arms or no legs. And it was only marginally related to where the topic finally went. Now that was really cool, but then you're disappointed after that. All right? I want to show you some opening sentences. These are real sentences out of published papers in very recent issues of JPSB, a couple of other 3 different journals I just dragged out. I'm not going to critique these. All I want to stress upon you is how important it is. I don't think any of these are for you guys.
Because remember, I'm going after you.
I just want to show how important it is. I want you to feel in your gut, how intrigued would you be to read this paper? And even if you did, would it set the stage for believing that you were under the control of an effective writer? Research in the area of self-regulation has argued that the cognitive resources available to exert control over regulatory processes is limited. All right, it's clearly an ego depletion paper. There's nothing wrong with that sentence. Could you start in a more engaging way? There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of artists start that way. My sense is you could say exactly that same thing. It's just a little bit more pithiness. Supporting social contact with others is one of human beings' greatest resources for studies, social support. Levels of activity in the population seem to ever increase. I don't even know what that means. It's a published article in a leading journal. People chart their futures by imagining how they will feel as events unfold. I like that. That's affective forecasting. That's Tim Wilson and Dan Gilbert. They write some of the best prose in social psychology. I only point out the people whose ones I like. One of the recurrent issues in the psycholexical approach to personality structure is the replicability of personality patterns in most languages. You've got to really be into psycholexical approaches to personality to You'll want to read that. It may be a fascinating and important article, but I think I can set it up with a more engaging first sentence. It just is too boom in your face with a lot of jargon. Again, it's not a bad sentence. In terms of meaning and structure, it's just not really engaging. When given the opportunity to profit from a dishonest act, what determines whether people cheat or remain honest? I kind of like that. Shows that you can start with a sentence, with a question. Don't overdo that. No, I think that's pretty effective. People possess a wealth of knowledge regarding the identities of their groups. I'm seeing people's head nods and scrunched faces that sort of confirm that my views of these are shared by Mr. President. Despite spending more time with themselves than with any other person, people often have surprisingly poor insight into their skills and abilities. I like that. It makes the point. Instead of just saying, people often don't understand themselves well. It's got a nice twist to it. Is that just me? That's Dave Dunning, who's also, I think, really very skilled in this kind of thing. My only point is you can see the importance of first sentences, ones that are really good and ones that are bad. Reviewers don't have all that much time. They want to get through this damn review. They're willing to do it, but they don't want to spend much time. If you can grab them early, they go, oh, this isn't going to be as bad as I thought it was. It's important. All right, what else can you do to be engaging? Focus your writing on people as much as you can in your writing. What is all theory and research in social personality psychology about? It's about people. So focus your writing primarily on people. I'll show you what I mean. Their thoughts, emotions, behavior, or traits, or psychological reactions. Now you will have to be talking about psychological theory and research. That's okay. But still you're going to be talking about people in the context of that. Very rarely is your writing really about researchers or writers. All right, think about the implications of these three statements for the topics of your sentences. Most of the topics of your sentences should have something to do with people and their behavior. Secondarily, with studies and theories. Almost never should the topic of your sentence be writers and researchers. Yet our journals, and I suspect your writing, is filled with sentences like this. I'll just let you read. What's the topic of the sentence as it's written? It's Eisenberger columns, right? Now, Naomi's great. If you want to write about Naomi Eisenberger, that's fine. I don't think that's what the author of this sentence thought he was writing about. I think he thought he was writing about neuroticism. So why not this? Neuroticism is associated with increased neural activity in the DACC, a region involved in the detection of both social and physical pain. Then you put the reference in to show this is where justification for this point is. It makes more interesting writing because you're writing about people and traits and reactions and not cluttering up your sentences with researchers. Very rarely do you have to use the researchers as the subject of the sentence. Rarely do you have to say, research has shown that. Just say what research has shown and give a citation by which your readers are smart enough to infer, oh, this research must have shown this. Right? Because you're not writing about research. Research has shown that. The topic of the sentence is research. You don't want the topic to be research. You want it to be whatever the research is about. It's okay to use authors as the subject of the sentence if the author really is the subject. Or if the reader really needs to know who that was. So these two sentences, I think, are fine. Goffman brought the topic of self-presentation to the attention of both sociologists and psychologists. You're talking about Goffman. Matson and Shaw question the notion that all pro-social behaviors are performed in service of people. That's fine. You're trying to let the readers know these people did this thing. So don't erase all authors from the topics of your sentences. Ask yourself, is this sentence really about the authors? All right, a couple more very quick things. These are things you can use immediately. They're trivial, but they will make your writing sound good. Don't use there as the subject of your sentence. There is not a noun. There is an adverb. Put the book there. And I guarantee you, unless somebody's ever taught you this, if you go back and look at whatever you've written most recently, you're going to find this. Go to a search for there. Now, you may be using there properly. Don't kill there every time it's in your paper. You might be using it as an adverb, and that's fine. There are numerous situational factors that influence French language. There. What's there doing there? That's what I'm wondering. Why not say numerous situational factors influence French information? Is that not a better, more direct, clear sentence where the topic is what it's supposed to be? There are many reasons that people become angry. How would you rewrite it? Researchers have debated this idea extensively. There have been many failed efforts to replicate this finding. See, it's just so jargon. You never say that in real life. You say, I'm going to do some research because there have been very many failed replicas. No. You might say, many studies have tried to replicate this finding without success. I don't think I'm making up the fact that those second sentences in each case are better than the first one, and it has to do with getting rid of there. Same thing with using it. Every one of you, go back to the paper you're working on when you get home. Search for every sentence that starts with it and see if you ought to be using the word it. Maybe 5% of the time you should. You're using it as a pronoun to refer to a noun. Get the book and put it there. That's fine. It may be that Machiavellians are less susceptible to shame. What noun does that it refer to? There is no noun that it refers to. It is hypothesized that it is, go hunting for the purpose of the word it there, you can't find it. It has been suggested that. It is worth noting that. If you can find, when you find sentences, ask yourself, what's the real subject of the sentence? Like the first one, what's the real subject? It's not it. It's Machiavellians. Why not right? Machiavellians may be less susceptible to shame. The hypothesis is, if it's been suggested, tell us who suggested it. Altmeister has suggested it. Somebody suggested it. Researchers have suggested it. And this one here, it's worth noting that. There's all kind of phrases people use. It's worth noting that. It is important to remember. It is important to point out. I hate those because it implies that everything else in the paper has not been important up to this point. Right? Because now I'm telling you this is important. All this other schlock that came beforehand. So, if it's important or worth noting, just say it. You don't need to say it's worth noting. Just say, if you just state it, it works fine. Now, every now and then you really need to push and say, this is absolutely important. That's okay. All rules are made to be broken. All right, those are my little tips. Let me give you some recommendations for some resources that you ought to have on your shelf. Many of you have seen this from some high school or college writing class. Elements of Style, it's classic. There's some controversy about a few of the rules. It's a little paperback. I recommend that you get it and you read it, you put it on your shelf, you refer to it, and a year from now you read it again. Then you apply it, a year from then you read it again, it will improve your writing. You must master APA style. As I said before, it's like you don't have good professional reading if you don't do APA style correctly. I highly recommend this little book by Paul Silva. Have you seen this thing? Because it's important not only to write well, but to write as much as you can. Paul has all kinds of great recommendations in there, some of which you'll say, well, I don't want to do it that way, and that's fine. You don't have to follow his way of doing it, but I recommend that. And then there's also articles about writing. And again, I'm going to send this out so you don't have to write all these down. Ben has a chapter and an article. Nurnberg has one. Baumeister and I wrote one 15 years ago. We haven't talked about it, but most of what we're talking about here are empirical articles, but some of you are going to try to write literature reviews. Ben has the one about how to write a cycle, or Boy and I have the one for just sort of in general. All right, so that's about all I can squeeze in 40 minutes. What were you writing?